example, I were to try the proposition, what makes life worth living is the death of an enemy, that's when the heart sings. That's when the heart sings. I could, for example, put that forward.
You are saying that certain personal things ought not to be publicly communicated, but you're also saying that anything that can be publicly communicated must be a lie. And I think those are two different claims.
Right,
and are you then really meaning to say that
self-deception.
no kind of public commitment, no ethical or political commitment is ever anything but a lie?
It is highly suspect. One asks whom it is meant to impress. One asks whom is one showing off to in a group like this.
But why should one think that only the hidden things are the most real? Why should one think that at all?
Oh, I think many people do. They're desperate to impress others, to persuade them, to solicit them. And what makes life worth living is so private a thing.
They might try to lie to themselves,
so
too,
intimate a thing, but I spoke also of self-delusion, that articulacy conveys the constant danger of a rhetoric of self-delusion. So I withdraw the word lie with pleasure and say a rhetoric of self-deception, of exhibitionism. We are in a society of unparalleled exhibitionism at every level.
What are you doing here?
But George, if the thing that's said is good and worthwhile, then what difference does it make if the person is sincere? I mean, who cares at some level whether Abraham Lincoln was sincere about this or that thing that he did in the abolition struggle? Because, I mean, what he did is what counts, and the words counted, even no matter what the hidden psychology behind it was.
Surely, George, you have a point, and the point is that we all should be more embarrassed than we seem. But probably we are. You know, so there's bound to be an element of a histrionic element, an element of play acting, and your rhetoric is so much part of that. We couldn't actually be ourselves without sensing the fact that you're about to come out with some such thing at any moment. You know, so it's all part of the game, isn't it?
But when I'll accept that, but it would be very troubling, part of the game, if one sacrificed to that the real inward of one's convictions.
Absolutely. But this is a very important thought. To what extent do you, by exposing before strangers that which really motivates your life, to what extent do you thereby lose that thing? Sometimes exposing yourself to strangers, and I mean that in both senses, does take away from you something. And that was the point of what I said earlier about sex. There are certain things which have an enormous meaning, but their privacy is part of that meaning. But we haven't really been talking about those things yet, have we? None of us have actually talked about their private relations with this or that person, but only with the structure within which those values can be conveyed.
Well, that's not quite true. One person did talk about her private experiences and then got told that she was immature for being so self-revealing.
But she didn't reveal very much.
Well, she only told, yeah, she's half depressed.
She only revealed what we think that all Russians feel at some stage in their life.
First of all, there is a huge difference in cultures, in West European culture and in Russian culture, and the degree of openness in public is absolutely amazingly different. That's one thing. Another thing is that I know very well what you are talking about, the feeling that one often has in life, especially in youth, that when you talk to strangers, you lose something and it cannot be retrieved. It's really like losing your innocence, a physical innocence, time after time after time, well, until nothing is left. But that is immature, that very feeling. You overcome that. You try to build, during your lifetime, a kind of a shell. And this shell is becoming thicker and thicker and thicker, and it allows you to keep something really private and having a very curved and strange form inside, to keep it completely locked from one's eyes. What you can say after that goes through some filter. It's not lie. It is a truth, if you decide to be truthful. I see nothing wrong in lying. absolutely nothing wrong in lying. But I choose to say the truth because why not? What's so important about this gathering? Why not say the truth? But it is it's kind of distilled like through certain filters, and you feel that you can let it go. But the real thing, the one that sits deep there, you wouldn't be able to tell people even if they beat you up. That's how, unfortunately, this shell grows. It divides you somehow in two different spheres. One goes out to the public, another remains, and you cannot say it to yourself because there's no words. Words are lost there. It's the dark hole, you know. So I think that's unfortunately what maturity is in our late age. Unfortunately, it's very unpleasant.
Yes, if what has been revealed here so far, nobody has actually said that this is what makes my life worth living. Only one person said, this is what saved me from depression. So if really this has been the most intimate, and I come from a culture, frankly, George, and here I empathize with you absolutely, I come from a culture which is totally shocked at the kind of public confessional which, let us say, American society in particular is. And I suspect this is where you, this kind of structure you sort of imposed on this gathering. And I absolutely agree with you of the level of horror with which I view the most intimate revelations being absolutely splurged out on television screen, on the media, in the most abominable way. And I say, don't these people understand anything called privacy or shame any longer? But I don't think that we've reached that, or that we reached that level in this gathering. And I think what you did was, state your fears before we even got too far. That's really what I suspect has happened in this particular case.
There is an assumption that a lot of people are sharing here that I'd like to question, and that is that the truest and deepest is the most interior, the most ineffable, and there's some core of ourselves, that some deep feeling or set of psychological attitudes that maybe not even expressible in words, and if we could only touch that, that's the deepest thing. Now, I don't know why one should think that. I mean, certainly it's a very peculiar modern romantic idea, that idea. And the idea, I mean, it means, in effect, that conduct is less real than this inner thing. And so why should we think that? Why shouldn't we think that our ethical conduct or any public expression is just as real?
Isn't the core idea of what George was saying, not that the things that mean so much to us are ineffable, but they're only effable, so to speak, in private, in front of somebody with whom one is intimate. It's a gesture of intimacy to reveal them, and I would agree with that. Yeah?
What about the proposition that what makes life worth living is the biochemistry of the brain? I mean, one way of regarding endogenous depression is that it's an imbalance in mineral salts in the brain, and you can take a little lithium and it'll all be over. Yep. Is that right? Maybe we're deluded in thinking life is worth living, and it's just because our brains are relatively healthy that we think life is worth living. Yeah.
Or because our brains are relatively ill.
Quite. Who would know the difference?
Your dialectic can work perfectly.
Indeed.
Either way.
You could twist this thing around and say, look around you at other people and pick out the lives that we think have been worth living, because of what's happened as a result of those lives. That was a life that was worth living in our own perception, anyway.
In fact, Wally, I think enormously intimate things have been said if one listened. Enormously intimate. You and I happen to be in the same boat. That is to say, I now ache at every moment for the hours from now when I will be with my old English sheepdog, who is the center of my life, as it happens. And I think you and I understand instinctively what that moment means, and this magnificent being doesn't talk, which of course is the key to communication in many ways. And all I want to add is a footnote for Tatiana. I can't quote the text verbatim, it's almost verbatim. 3 times I was within an hour of suicide when the slow movement in Brahms' third quartet pulled me back. Ludwig Wittgenstein, 3 times I was within. But he wrote that note, dated it, and sealed it. And it is only long after his life he certainly regarded it as none of our damn business.
Fine,
and we have now dug it up because...
Fine. So what is literature about? That not trying to make a public confession?
Because we live in a period of such expository nakedness. What gives a human being dignitas, preeminent dignity, and makes it resistant to the state? It is the ability to keep in oneself the great secret, the great pain. I take your image of the shell, which is a very important image. You say they beat you, did I hear you rightly? And the shell doesn't break. I think I heard you rightly. And thank God that there are people whose shell, thank God. And I'm haunted by my own physical cowardice. I imagine 2 minutes after they would start beating me, I'd start telling everything. I don't know. I know that if they started beating my dog, in 30 seconds I would spill the whole bloody... So when your shell, help me on that image, which is an important one, if the shell is strong enough when they beat you, hallelujah.
There's something I think you need to consider if we're talking about the great British shell. The British work so hard at constructing a shell around their internal reality that they forget about the eternal reality. The truth is that the shell is empty.
That the shell
is empty. The shell is all there is. When what you do, when you spend your entire life making yourself impervious, the example I like to give is the attitudes of various nations to the three little words, I love you. You know, the Frenchman may say it whenever. The Italian says it hoping it might one day be true. Ti amo. The Englishman never says it for fear that one day it might not be true, and so you never hear it. And it remains unsayable, the unsayable thing, because of this notion of integrity, which in the end means you've got nothing but shell. And if you don't verbalize thoughts, the chances are you don't have them. I mean, it's going to be difficult to start a discussion here about whether you can think without language, but I happen to think you don't think terribly well without language. Your dog might understand you without language, but not too many other people would. And what is madness after all but speaking a private language, barking when you should be speaking, and so on. So what I'm saying is that in this anxiety to protect the untouchable centre of yourself, you end up having no untouchable centre of yourself. They could beat you and you wouldn't break, because in fact you're all shell.